Podcast. I'm your co-host, Jose Luis Granados Ceja. I'm a Mexican-born journalist living and working here in Mexico City, and we're doing a bit of an experiment today and doing a live reaction to the debate that most of the country just watched. Hopefully lots of participation in the living rooms across the nation as the leading candidates debated the topics of the day in Mexico's first presidential debate here in the country, as the country heads into an election June 2nd, which is an election day here in Mexico. Obviously, the candidates who attended today's debate are the three candidates on the ballot. The candidate in first place, representing the Morena-led coalition, the Sigamos Haciendo Historia, Claudia Sheinbaum, who, as I mentioned, leading in the polls. Also participating is Xóchitl Gálvez, representing the opposition coalition, the PRI-PAN-PRD coalition, who is bringing together the opposition parties here in Mexico, running a single candidate, with the exception of the third and final candidate in today's debate, which was Jorge Álvarez Máynez. We're just waiting for our guest to join us. As always, we will have Hackbarth, co-host of the Mexican Politics Podcast, with us today. And of course, we also are counting on the participation of Violeta Vázquez-Rojas, who is a very talented political analyst appearing on TV screens all across the country, regularly featuring, providing commentary, has become a very important voice here in Mexico when it comes to a fair, progressive, informed analysis of the political situation. I think we've been blessed to be able to count on the voice of Violeta as well in various other spaces, also as a collaborator with Sin Embargo, a digital outlet in Spanish, and of course also Sentido Común, where our co-host Kurt Hackbarth also participates as a collaborator there. So like I said, we're just waiting for the technical issues, as usual, to get sorted out. But I wanted to begin, as we wait for Kurt to connect, with my own thoughts as we begin this live reaction to the first presidential debate. I think one of the things that has often been part of the political discussion here in the country recently has been precisely the Electoral Institute, the National Electoral Institute, the Electoral Authority here in Mexico, INE as we call it here in Mexico, which has been the subject of much criticism due to its tremendous, large budget. It's been the subject of much criticism, particularly from the forces that support Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador. He has made several attempts to actually reform the National Electoral Institute as part of a broader effort to bring in what he calls Republican austerity. Essentially, the INE, the National Electoral Institute, has been heavily criticized due to the excessive budget and what some have called the gilded bureaucracy that has taken over the Institute, which in the sense that you have a very, very wealthy electoral authority. They argue that they need the budget that they receive on a yearly basis in order to carry out their functions, but obviously one that is very distant from the reality of most Mexicans in this country, who unfortunately cannot afford the gilded lifestyle provided by the salaries that are offered there. There was a big change-up at the International Electoral Institute. The term of Lorenzo Córdoba, who was a bit of a thorn in the side of the government here in Mexico, had to step down as a result of his term finishing there, and being replaced by a new female leadership, who is now at the head of the National Electoral Institute. And so the Electoral Institute, just doing some check-in here with tech support. The Electoral Institute in Mexico is charged with responding with organizing the presidential debates. So there are three presidential debates. This was the first one. Each one's going to have different topics, as we saw the topics that we explored today. But I think if there was a takeaway for anybody, and at least judging on the reaction in social media, it was the very poor organization that we saw as a result of some of the technical issues. And I know I'm one to criticize, considering that we're having some trouble getting our guests to be able to join us. But the technical issues that appeared as a result of the issues around the clock, which came up several times during the actual debate, with Claudia Sheinbaum in particular pointing out the fact that she felt, and even making a quip at one point that's suggesting that Xóchitl Gálvez was actually trying to steal time and being favored by the moderators. The moderators themselves were subject of debate ahead of the election debate here. There was some criticism of Manuel López San Martín in particular. So today's debate was hosted by Denise Merker and Manuel López San Martín, two journalists, news readers, news presenters here in Mexico who work for private media outlets. They were selected as part of a bureaucratic mechanism within the National Electoral Institute. And Manuel López San Martín ended up walking into some controversy as a result of some comments he made, which made people doubt a bit what they felt was his lack of impartiality. Specifically, he criticized López Gatell, who was formerly the Undersecretary for Health, and saying that he was a garbage representative and belonged in the garbage bin. Nonetheless, despite the pressure, he remained in his post and stayed in the position of being host of the actual debate tonight. Unfortunately, we're having some issues with the transmission. Kurt Hackbarth is unable to connect. If you give me just a few seconds to try to resolve that. All right, it looks like he should be able to be joining us now. So we have finally, apologize for the technical issues here. We got Kurt to connect with us here. Kurt is coming to us live from Oaxaca, where he lives and works. Kurt, I was just kind of doing the news anchor thing where I was trying to talk about things for 5 minutes without sounding too awkward. Just kind of giving the context for everybody, just to fill you in. I was talking to folks about the controversy around the debate, and I was going to say, I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense often when we talk about sort of the election evaluation, who won, who lost. But I will say this. I definitely think that if there was a loser in this, it was the National Electoral Institute. You know, there was a poor transmission quality. There was a weird buzzing sound the whole time. I actually had to switch channels to find a better audio. I was originally on channel 22, switched to channel 14. It was a little bit better, but even then I had to put my speakers on full blast. So, and of course the issues with the clock. I hope that people are able to move past that, because I would hate for that to be the topic of discussion as a result of this debate, because I do think that a lot of things came out of this. But I've talked plenty. I want to thank everybody for joining us. We have about 30 people watching us live. This is really exciting. Like I said, this is an experiment for us here at Soberanía, the Mexican Politics Podcast, just trying to get information out to you about Mexico in an unbiased way, in a way that sympathizes with the working class, the poor majority of this country, in English. We think it's missing. And so without further ado, Kurt, I'll hand it over to you. What were your impressions? Let's start there. What did you think about tonight's debate, takeaways? And as soon as you're done, if you could do us a favor of introducing our special guest as well. I've mentioned her already, who's joining us today, a very talented political analyst, Violeta Vázquez-Rojas. But we'll start with you, Kurt. What did you think tonight's debate?
Well, I think you set the stage there, Jose Luis. If there's a loser here, it's the National Electoral Institute. It was a very erratic debate with a series of questions that seemed to be repetitive, that seemed to kind of reinforce the stereotype of the National Electoral Institute as an elitist institution, right, that caters to a vision of democracy that is, elitist, right? And that, added to a series of technical problems, the questions with the time, whether they could get the clocks working or not, the sound issues that you mentioned. It seemed like the moderators didn't really have a great deal of control the whole time. Those technical issues aside, we've talked, you and I, about how debates tend to reinforce the, the views that you have going into a debate.
I totally agree. Yep.
So here we had Claudia Sheinbaum, who I think was very much in control, right? And struggled against the erratic nature of the debate to keep, to make her points clearly and strongly. At times, it seemed like Claudia Sheinbaum was the one trying to keep the debate on track. Not the moderators, but Claudia Sheinbaum was the one trying to keep the debate organized and going and saying, well, these are the topics for this debate. Security and other things are going to be topics for the second debate. Let's all kind of try to keep things organized, right? I think Claudia was very good in hitting her main points, which had to do with, her record in Mexico City, related to health, transparency, education. She talked about several of the constitutional reforms that López Obrador has proposed recently, right? And also, I think, was very selective in hitting Xóchitl Gálvez back with, corruption issues in particular, right? Without kind of getting hooked in and answering every single attack that Xóchitl Gálvez made. On the other hand, I think Xóchitl Gálvez did not have a particularly good debate. She was nervous, which I think is understandable. It's her first presidential debate, but she seemed to be talking fast. She seemed to be tripping over her words, and she seemed to be desperate to get out as many attacks as possible, whether or not they were germane to the topic at hand. If you're going to do attacks, they have to at least be somewhat relevant to the topic that they were talking about. And it seemed like she was just trying to shove the attacks out the door.
I mean, I think they all looked a little bit nervous. I think all three of them. I mean, there were several memes already going out on social media about Jorge Máynez as a smile. That's kind of took up most of the discussion around him. But I think as the debate went on, Claudia settled in, got more comfortable. You could tell, like you said, I think you make an excellent point when you mentioned that it seemed like she was the one trying to move the debate forward. You're right. There was even some repetitive questions, but Xóchitl seemed to get angrier as the night went on, as opposed to more confident or more comfortable, just seemed to get a scowl that grew bigger and bigger. And I don't think that if we were going to say, she needed to do X, Y, and Z. She needed to have a really good debate, I think, from the first part. I think she needed to make a convincing case that she's a serious candidate, but mostly people know her for kind of her theatrics. And I think she needed to set herself apart in terms of what is her actual relationship. She tried to call herself as a woman without any political parties, but obviously she's very much the candidate of the opposition party. So I think if she needed to do certain things tonight, she didn't accomplish them. And I would expect that the polls following today's debate are going to reflect exactly what you said at the beginning, which is that this is mostly going to confirm things. Claudia is going to keep her massive lead. Xóchitl is going to stay hovering around 25, 30%.
Yeah, I just want to make one more quick point, and then we're going to hand it over to our wonderful special guest tonight. Jesus Hermosillo was talking about it right here now in the chat. I think the real bomb line for Xóchitl Gálvez was this attempt to repeat over and over again that Claudia Sheinbaum was cold and heartless.
Yeah.
Right? And I've mentioned this in Twitter over the course of the past week. The problem is when you go on the attack and you have high negatives, you already come in with high negatives like Xóchitl Gálvez did. Those negative attacks tend to bounce back at you, the famous boomerang effect.
Yeah.
And repeat, 3, 4, and 5 times, which is clearly like a Max Cortázar fed line, that she's cold and heartless. When, whether one agrees or disagrees with Claudia Sheinbaum, I think it's impossible to say that she's, cold and heartless. I think that really was one of the real attack lines that bounced back at her, right?
Yeah.
Plus, kind of erratic use of the signage. I've always been skeptical about how much you can use signs in debates, right? Because it's too quick. It's one sign after the other. People don't even know what you're talking about, right? In very rare cases, and you just wind up kind of confusing people.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we're all very happy to have here in our deluxe Oaxaca studio, Dr. Vázquez-Rojas, who is one of Mexico's foremost political commentators, writes at Sin Embargo, writes in Milenio, is on la hora de opinar, and joining us tonight to give us her post-debate analysis. Violeta, did this debate get off the ground? What did we just watch? What happened here?
I guess, well, first of all, thanks for having me here, Jose Luis. It's a pleasure to greet you and your audience. Thank you for the hospitality. I guess what we just saw was the confirmation of everything that was already said.
Mm-hmm.
We already knew that Xóchitl Gálvez was going to attack, but also I think an important maybe a novelty of this debate is that there are no novelties, right? That, for instance, the usually the debates are the moments when they can pull out the skeletons from the closet.
Yeah.
But what we saw here, for instance, all the attacks, the attacks that Xóchitl Gálvez put forth, were all, they were all very already known. Like we all knew that it was going to be the Repsamen issue or the Línea 12. It was already predicted that she was going to come up with all those things, and she didn't come up with anything new.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why Claudia Sheinbaum didn't even have to reply, because those are things that are already passed. So I think in that sense it was boring, but also I think what we saw is, just as you guys said, the confirmation of what we already knew, that Claudia Sheinbaum was going to be very, very sensitive and serene, and she was not going to be manipulated by all this, go negative policy. And I guess the surprise was the responses of Máynez, because just before the debate, Kurt and I were talking about who he was going to attack the most, right? If he was going to go after Xóchitl Gálvez and get the points, or if the way to get at least the vote of the ones who are still undecided might be attacking directly Claudia Sheinbaum, and he went for both. He was, I was like trying to keep track of his attacks, and they were pretty even, I think.
Yeah, I think that's true. And it's actually funny that I think sometimes in these debates, I think unfortunately what they tend to do is import the worst of the US style format, right? These kind of 1 minute responses, this kind of bolsa de tiempo where you can kind of supposedly debate with each other, but instead, kind of just repeating a lot of attack lines. Sometimes what you learn about the debate is not what comes out on the sides. So, for example, Xóchitl Gálvez at one point said that she supported the social programs, but the one example that she gave of the social program was Jóvenes Construyendo Futuro, which is precisely a temporary program where people who join this apprenticeship program have 1 year of apprenticeships, right? Which seemed to reinforce her idea that the social program should be temporary, right? The one example she gave of the social program was the apprenticeship program where you get 1 year and then, you have to give a chance to somebody else, right? So I think that's an example of where Xóchitl Gálvez kind of doesn't know where she is, right? She's torn between her conservative instincts, which is our social program should be temporary, and what she's been told to say, which is that social program should be permanent, right? She also said at one point, I want to get rid of the militarization, right? Quiero quitar la militarización, which you said in a very strange way, quitar la militarización, right? But then didn't go into any further detail from there, right? On the other hand, I think the positive about Claudia, besides, I think, her effort to, stay on track with the answers, was kind of her presidential way of keeping the debate together, because the moderators weren't keeping the debate together, right? The technicians weren't keeping the debate together because the clocks weren't keeping the correct time. So it was Claudia saying, look at the time. This isn't the topic for this debate. This is the topic for the second debate, right? It's like Claudia was presidential not so much in the answers she gave, but in the fact that she had to keep the debate together because the INE weren't, wasn't, and the moderators weren't.
Yeah. I think another way that I think was really clear that kind of helped her stand out was the fact that it was really clear to me that she was well prepared, that she clearly had practice, really knew her issues. She does come from the advantage of being a front runner. You know, the fact that she's also representing a popular party and a popular project, and therefore can kind of speak from the experience of governing, right? I found Máynez's attack line pretty curious in the sense that he seemed to be suggesting that that's both of you are the same and I'm the new, right? That's the whole candidate, lo nuevo, the new. But I don't think that's particularly convincing because I think a lot of people understood that the change candidate in 2018 was López Obrador, and they're still kind of viewing that as a transition kind of government, a government that's still implementing new things. So it hasn't kind of burned itself out. So I'd say I don't know what he was trying to accomplish by that line of questioning. But I think if he needed to accomplish something in this debate, it was to kind of stand out, to show that he's a serious contender. And I don't think that he was successful if that's what we're judging him by. I think it was a really big flub to do the sign language thing, knowing full well that the whole debate is being accompanied by sign language, and he didn't do it well. But like I said, so he ends up being further marginalized, likely kind of staying in his position. At this point, I think the party that's backing him, Movimiento Ciudadano, has to consider whether or not they're going to be able to get enough votes to actually keep their registration as a party, because if they get below 3%, that's it for them at the federal level. It'll be left to just the states at that point. But finally, I wanted to ask, in terms of preparation, what you thought, and this goes for Violeta as well, of course, what you thought about Xochitl's preparation. Did you feel like she was actually, up to the task of presenting herself as a viable presidential candidate, in the sense that people see her, because they say, you mentioned a lot of times we import things from the United States, but that's one of the key questions that people ask after a debate in the United States is, do you see them as a presidential? Do you think that Xochitl was able to communicate that today?
What do you think about that one? Did she look presidential?
Not at all.
Not at all.
I think she was not even able to keep a poker face, or to keep herself together when she was getting madder and madder at Claudia's responses, or Claudia avoiding responses. And I also think she was well prepared for a debate, but just for attacking Claudia exactly at the point where we knew she was going to attack.
Yeah.
And she didn't have strong data, for instance, to support even her attacks. She did present 3 or 4 maybe new proposals, but these are things that she has proposed before, but they are not viable, at least financially, like this pension for adultos mayores to lower the pension for 60-year-olds and plus. And that, I think, I don't have the numbers here, but I know the numbers are not viable. And also she proposed one more about alimentación and also, but I think this was particularly interesting. The most, let's say, the most thoughtful proposals she has are in the shape of cards, right? The card for health and the card for women, I think. And this is a way that PRIAN has had of solving, or at least getting rid of their responsibility as governments and as a state. And it was very interesting at that point where Denise Merker asked explicitly if this meant this card for health,
Right.
if this meant
Tarjeta
Rosa de
Yeah.
Salud, if it meant transferring public funds to private and she said yes. And that's interesting, because I think that's what finally depicts what's the bottom of the PRIAN politics.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And again, sometimes you let things out at the moment you least think about it, right? Or at least intend it. So Xóchitl Gálvez talked about this tarjeta rosa, but when she was pressed on this and other questions, she didn't seem to have as much of a grasp on detail. So she said right from her first answer about health that if you don't have medicines or if you don't have access to medicines, you have to go to private hospital. She came right out and said that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was echoed in her proposal about education, right?
Mm-hmm.
First, she basically copied Sheinbaum's scholarship idea, and you could see Claudia looking at the camera going, "That's my proposal," right? She was like, "What the hell?" Right? But then, Xóchitl came out with something very revealing, a very pre-on policy. The scholarships also will apply if you go to private schools, right? Morena's scholarship policies are for public school students.
Yep.
So it's almost like a U.S. voucher system. Xóchitl Gálvez wants you to basically have a voucher to go to private schools, which would only aggravate the educational, breach and gap in this country. Right? Overall, I think what you see is kind of two candidates very much copying a lot of Morena's rhetoric and policies, although twisting them to their, to their convenience. So you have Máynez repeating, por el bien de todos, for the good of all, primero los niños y niñas, just copying López's rhetoric. You see Máynez talking about a national care system. That's a Sheinbaum policy. You see, they realize that Morena's policies are popular. So what they're doing is they're just basically trying to copy them and hoping that you won't notice that they're trying to twist them to their convenience, right? Like, me too, I'm going to have scholarships too, but they're going to also apply to private schools. So it's a voucher system. Me too, I'm going to have universal health care, but you're going to have to get your medicines at the private hospitals at who knows what cost, right? So that's what they're hoping you won't notice. We're going to copy Morena's policies, but we're hoping you won't notice what we're really going to do with them.
Absolutely. They can't help but show their true colors, and their true colors are neoliberalism at the end of the day. I think the two examples you gave are spot on. This idea of actually using the state to transfer wealth, not into the hands of the working class or the poor, but into the hands of the owners of these private institutions like hospitals and schools, to the benefit not of the middle class. And I think people need to understand that the class dynamics in Mexico are not the same as like the United States. When you talk about the middle class here, when you're talking about the people who are sending their children to private schools, we're not talking about the middle class as people understand it. It's the upper middle class and the upper class. So this is basically a program that would benefit the top 1%, maybe the top 10% of this country. And I think it's revealing. On the contrast, what you had was Claudia, and I really appreciate this when she does it on the campaign trail, and she did it today in the debate, which is that stressing that these are rights, that these are social conquests, that these are universal for a reason. And I think we heard that again. And a comment about the population of Mexico, right? Like there's been a huge politicization of the population through the mañaneras, through the debates happening around kitchen tables, et cetera, et cetera. And I think if your average family was watching today's debate and saw exactly what you're describing, these efforts to kind of copy the popular programs and the popular measures of Morena and try to give them this neoliberal veneer to please their political bases, I think most families can see that difference. On the one side, you have this government that promised this, came in, did it, and dramatically improved my life, right? And views it and defends it and elevates it to the constitutional status. And then you have this other one who actually is trying to desperately find ways to chip away, to try to pretend like they're going to keep it, but actually not. And I don't think that they're actually going to be very successful in convincing people as well. And I think before I hand it over, one final thing, and I wanted to hear your feedback as well. Personally, as a Mexican person, I don't like when they try to profit from tragedies. I was very uncomfortable with the fact that even before the debate started, Xóchitl was talking about all the people that she had invited who were, in some shape or form, in her view, victims of Morena and its governance, right? The victims of Repsamen, which happened when Claudia was delegada, head of the borough here in Mexico City, mentioning the Line 12 collapse, which happened under Claudia Sheinbaum's watch when she was jefa de gobierno. But it made me uncomfortable, and imagine that other people too. I don't think people like being reminded of these kinds of tragedies and trying to be explicitly in a kind of political thing. And I think it also opens up to her own kind of attacks, right? She's there on behalf of the PAN, right? I saw a lot of comments on social media also being like, oh, if you're bringing victims, what about the victims of the ABC fire, right? If you're so worried about victims in this country. So maybe Violeta, you could share with us, what do you think is the impact around the kitchen tables in Mexico for the families that made the effort to watch today's debate? What do you think families are talking about? What do you think is going to be the water cooler discussion tomorrow in workplaces here in Mexico?
I think, first of all, I agree on everything you said about using tragedies for political, to get some political gain. I think that's unethical. But we are so used to it that we don't even notice it, right?
Yeah.
So it's to point out this thing. And what I don't know if the debate is going to be on top of the conversation for a long time, because there's so many other things happening. And for instance, what happened in Ecuador, I think, is going to take over the conversation tomorrow and for the following days. I don't think this debate is going to be the central part of the discussion, because, as we said, it was very predictable. Nothing really changed, maybe except Máynez might get a few points, but I don't think anything.
Probably at
further than
Xochitl's
that.
expense, right?
Most probably, yes.
Yeah.
I don't think Claudia's going to.
From my point of view, I think another point to kind of conclude with about what families are talking about at the kitchen table, I think a lot of the debate was unintelligible to a lot of people. I think the questions were complex. I think they were wonky. I think they were technical. I think they were repetitive. And that elicited, in turn, very technocratic responses, which is exactly kind of the model of democracy of the INE, of the National Electoral Institute, right? They kept talking about autonomous institutions. They kept talking about, things that really didn't have a lot of relevance to the average person's lives, right? So I think the few areas where there was actually real important questions there for the average person kind of got lost in there, plus the technical problems and the clock on the roads. So I think there's a point where you just kind of say, this half hour, I just totally missed it. I mean, unless you're a policy wonk and trying to follow along. And I think that's a problem with the questions. I think that's a problem with the moderators. And it's the question of that kind of elite style of democracy that López Obrador has been so successful in breaking through that abstruse elite dialogue of, unintelligible questions and a whole system of governance where everything is meant to stay the same. And nothing is ever really meant to ever really change for the average person, right? So I think in that sense, the debate really showed itself as what it is, as what the INE is, as what, the PRIAN and, Movimiento Ciudadano are. And I think Claudia's best moments were at least when she could break through that, right? And get to what's really at stake here. And she's going to have to keep doing that. And I really like when she talked back to Denise Merker, and a couple of times kind of, working the ref on some of the questions, right? Like Merker had said there was no advance on corruption in this sexennium, quoting some, NGO or other, right? I'll have to go back and see which NGO it was, right? I think the average Mexican is very clear that there has been advances on corruption in the sexennium. And it's just a ridiculous question to claim there wasn't because an NGO says there wasn't, right? And questions about how you can finance things and how you can afford things. And Claudia said very clearly, we were able to do social programs in this administration precisely because of that massive amount of money we saved from anti-corruption measures. The social programs are the examples of that. Yeah. Those were the moments where you're kind of breaking through this elite, abstruse, technocratic dialogue that dominated, Mexican elite politics for so many terms before. And Claudia's going to have to keep doing that.
Yeah,
because I don't think the debates are going to change very much.
No, I don't think so either.
Feminicidios didn't go.
Oh, it didn't go down, right? And she
had just said it. She
right.
had just said they would down 40%.
Right.
Yeah. No, I think the debates aren't going to change much. Claudia's job was to do basically what she did tonight, right? Like to be confident, to give that presidential image, to really keep to her messaging, to speak to the strength.
Look straight at the camera. Xóchitl just looked angry.
Yeah, and uncomfortable. I saw a lot of people mentioning she couldn't seem to even kind of look at the camera, right? Like these are basic candidate skills, right? These are the things that you have experts work with you and improve with you. So I think just another argument is to suggest that she wasn't prepared. Unfortunately, probably today's poor organization and poor implementation debate is probably going to mean that there'll be less people tuning into the next ones. We'll probably see a decline in viewership, which is unfortunate because I would like people to have more political discussion. I saw here in the chat, people were asking when the next debate. The next debate is happening April 28th at 8 p.m. and then May 19th, likewise at 8 p.m. And thanks to Jay Watts, also a member of the Mexico Solidarity Project, for giving us that information. I also want to highlight a comment here from José. He says, thanks you guys for taking time to transmit Mexican news in English. This helps me have my American friends to understand the other side of Mexican politics that the mainstream media won't do. Thank you so much, José, and thank you everybody who's been joining us today. We wanted to do a really quick thing. We're about at the 35-minute mark, so maybe we'll end with one more question for you. And I wanted to end on a light note. There were a couple of moments where I laughed out loud. I will say Máynez trying to very awkwardly do sign language was one of them. The other one that really jumped out at me was when Denise Merker had to remind Xóchitl more than once if she was interested in actually answering the question, which I thought was quite funny. But definitely for me, and I hope I didn't take yours away from you, but for me, the funniest moment of the night was when Xóchitl Gálvez said that we should ask dead people what they think. So, Kurt, what was the funniest moment for you?
Well, I think my funniest moment was the signage upside down.
Oh, yeah.
Right? You have line 12 sign upside down, the trains, and then at the end, the weird flag thing, when she was trying to give her patriotic end, was also upside down. Right? Yeah. Which allowed me to tweet, Xóchitl Gálvez ended this debate as she began it, upside down. I don't know. What were some of your kind of weird moments in the debates?
Well, weird, I guess those ones, but also very expected. But I think it was witty from Claudia when she said she was trying to measure time because all the time counters were upset. And Xóchitl was beginning some time or something, and she said she's gonna try to steal the money, the la bolsa de tiempo.
She's gonna steal the time.
The time.
Right. The time bank. Right. Yeah. So there we are.
That's it, man. Well, I thought that this was a fun exercise. I'm glad. Kurt, as always, it's really fun to do this program with you. We'll also be recording a program. We're going to probably, maybe mention the debate, but obviously there's a lot of stuff happening in the news. We're going to start the program talking about the assault on the Mexican embassy by Ecuadorian authorities. There's lots of news to cover this week on the program. As always, we'll be dropping it into your podcast apps and on YouTube on Tuesday morning. But Kurt, if you could let us know if people are interested in following you and your coverage, where can they find you? And likewise for Violeta, if you can let us know where people can find your writing and follow you on social media.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm on Twitter at Kurt Hackbarth, just my full name. I write in Jacobin Magazine. Those pieces are in English, and a lot of times they're translated into Jacobin Latin America. And then I'm also on Sentido Común, the great project that Violeta is also one of the editors on. So I have a column in Sentido Común, and then actually we're going to have a debate panel tomorrow night live on Sentido Común with two excellent panelists, right? Vanessa Romero and tomorrow night in Sentido Común, Áreas Comunes. And thanks for joining us tonight.
And that'll be in Spanish. So let people know if you're interested in hearing analysis from Sentido Común. Those of you who speak, listen, and read in Spanish, check out information there, Sentido Común. And Violeta, where can people find your work?
I'm on Twitter because we still call it Twitter. It's at Violeta VR. I write in Sin Embargo every 2 weeks. So my next column in Sin Embargo is due tomorrow. And Milenio once, the last Friday of every month. Also, I'm on La Hora de Opinar every Tuesday at 10 p.m.
And if you could watch that, that's great because Violeta does battle with three conservatives at once. Right? Left, right, and center.
And then all of the second wave of attacks on social media the next day. No, she's a real champ. Violeta, in particular, I want to say thank you to you for joining us. As Kurt just said, actually, usually Violeta is on nationally broadcasted news analysis programs, so it's really quite an honor to have her here with us here on our humble little podcast, Soberanía, the Mexican Politics Podcast, coming to you every Tuesday, bringing you news and analysis about Mexico in an unbiased way, a perspective that you won't get from the mainstream media. I'm Jose Luis Granados Ceja, journalist here in Mexico City, working with Venezuela Analysis and, of course, with the Mexico Solidarity Media website. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. This was a really fun exercise. And please follow us and tell your friends. This is a new effort. This is a new endeavor. So it's important for us to try to get the word out there. I think there is an important niche out there to be filled. And hopefully we can put in, as we say in Spanish, nuestro granito de arena, our little bit of contribution to help correct the narrative about what's actually happening here in Mexico. And we'll look forward to being in touch with all of you next time. As always, Kurt, it's been a pleasure. Violeta, thanks again. We'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon. Bye.